r/AskReddit. What's a red flag that you ignored in a significant other, only to realize it was a bigger deal later? Biggest red flag? When we were new liwats, he came home one day and informed me he had joined the military. We had talked about it the way people talk about maybe going skydiving someday. That's a decision you should make together if you're married. It impacted my life quite a bit, and I spent over 8 years of a 12-year marriage on my own between tours, trips to train, a year bachelor billet, and then all the fun times he got to have with his military friends, while I stayed home, because someone needed to watch the baby. I used to think it was generous and kind how he would sacrifice things to help others, until I realized that he always put everyone and everything before our relationship. For example, I've had to drive myself to the emergency room because he had already made social plans, and it would be rude for us both to cancel. I always had to quit my jobs and hobbies, because if I wanted to see him, it had to be around his jobs and his hobbies. And his hobbies were always very expensive for the short time they held his interest. He couldn't try something new unless he was fully kitted out. Snowboarding was probably the most expensive and shortest. I think what really made me realize how crazy this relationship had become was when I was over the moon that he walked slowly enough for me to keep up on crutches because he had planned for us to go hiking. I went hiking on crutches with a sprained knee because I didn't want to watch him sulk if we couldn't do what he wanted to do. I ended up making my injury much worse because the crutches were too difficult to use on the muddy parts of the trail, and when we were going back downhill, I realized how pathetic I sounded as I gushed to my friends, whom he barely knows, because they aren't as cool as his military buddies. It was so sweet, he slowed down so I could keep up. I mean, I have 8 weeks of physical therapy now, but he got me ice when we got back and let me take a nap. Yeah. That's when I realized it was way past time to GTFO. That little details and stories didn't always add up. Any single one could be easily dismissed or laughed off, but they kept coming and kept getting harder to ignore. Turned out she was a compulsive liar. I hope she's better now. I'm pretty sure the cause of this was being molested by her father, something I later surmised by adding up a bunch of clues and desperately needing to fabricate her own reality. Edit. Apparently this is frighteningly common, and everyone who's been subjected to this has my sympathy. To the many people who owned up to being the compulsive liar but are working on it, all the best to you in your journey of healing. We had a summer job painting and repairing dorm rooms. While we worked, one of us would start singing a song. If he picked a song, we would sing it together. If I picked the song, he would sing a different one on top of me until I switched to his song. This was a perfect metaphor for our entire relationship. Edit. Thank you everyone who shared your stories. I'm very glad mine was able to help you. For those who asked, it took me 6 years to realize the problem and do something about it. Abuse that erodes you slowly over years can be hard to spot and harder to do anything about. Never feel ashamed of how long your own journey takes you. I'm now married to a wonderful partner who sings along with me. Ironically, our music tastes are completely opposite and we both can't stand the other person's favorite songs. But here's a green flag for you. We talk and joke about it all the time, address if there's an actual issue, and had a very carefully curated wedding playlist. We also came up with a game where we will call out our number ratings of whatever song that comes on the radio, which lets us know when to change the song for the other person's sake, and also has found us a few more songs we didn't realize we agree on. We had different schedules as managers at the same restaurant, and I came home in the afternoon one day to an open laptop. It was open to our online dating site. I kinda laughed about it and figured there had to be a decent excuse for this because the idea was ridiculous. I thought we were super happy and was prepared to understand whatever she was about to tell me. I mentioned to her while she was on her break what I had seen and was met with a long pause. Not a great sign. After what seemed like an eternity, she tells me she received an email saying she had a match and that it upset her. She opened the website to delete her account and assured me I had nothing to worry about. I didn't think she was up to anything. Suspicious silence aside, I just accepted it and moved on. About a month or so later, we're having a little get together at our place. My girlfriend pulls out this awful affliction shirt and asks my friend if it's his. He spends a lot of time around there. Him and his girlfriend come by for board games and movies and whatnot. He spends a bunch of time there himself hanging out with me. Not unreasonable in my opinion. My friend is adamant it's not his, and I think nothing of it. He brings up the idea to me that she's seeing other guys. She only has girlfriends as far as we know. I defended her. Told him he was crazy. He got progressively more suspicious and upset with her, and it boiled over, and he snapped at her in the middle of a game night and I kicked him out. Turns out she was cheating on me. She broke up with me and moved in with a friend who she hangs out with all the time. Turns out she was seeing a friend of his that would come down on weekends. There were plenty of times she'd go out drinking on weekends with her girlfriends and she'd go meet this guy at his place and hang out with his buddy. His wardrobe happens to be full of these terrible shirts similar to the first one found. I didn't find out until after. I tried to chase her for a while after, not knowing she was seeing anyone. I hung out with her at this place one time and the dude was there. The day before it all came out. I got along with the guy. Thought he was pretty cool. We liked a lot of the same stuff. Same alcohol. Same games. Music. Had a pretty good night talking to the guy. My iPhone 4 broke, and she gave me hers as a replacement because she'd just gotten a new one. There was nothing on it, but the photos had a cloud folder available that had naked photos of her. Liking what I see, I open it up, only to get hit in the face of pics of this guy's dick and her sucking it, videos of them having sex, cute little picture messages and heart faces, and all kinds of bullshit. Shit that dated back a long time depending on where it was in accordance to stuff I recognized her sending me. She was banging this guy the whole time before we broke up, but she was trying to keep me on the hook too after the breakup. We kept hanging out, and she kept telling me I was her best friend and she didn't want to lose me. There were days we'd hang out, and times we'd have sex. There were times she'd tell me we'd get back together in the near future. It was so weird. My head was all kinds of fucked up for a long time. Devastated. After this she disappeared and went to live with this guy in another city. Found out through a mutual friend and was crushed. If something sounds suspicious, discuss it. Don't just think you know better. If it sounds fishy, it's okay to question it. I wasted like 2 years getting over it. I don't know how I let it get as far as I did. I should have listened to my friend in the first place. Him and I didn't have too many plans. Just I would go hang out with him for the day. It was normal. He got a call from one of his boys to go play some basketball. Which is fine we didn't have too much going on that day and I didn't want to yoko. I was his only ride there and back. I'm okay with this. I told him I would sunbathe and read a book while they played. He can have his boy time. He knows I love my books. I got totally engrossed with the book while they were playing. It had only been an hour, and he comes up to me and says I need to take him home. Okay, NP. I noticed he was upset, but thought it was something due to friends. I was surprised that he left so soon. Nope, seeing me on the grass and enjoying it made him jealous. The book was more important than him. I was so confused. I mean you can have your girl time and your boy time, but when both of them kinda collide, would this be the best scenario? He was very proud about how good he was at manipulating people and causing them problems, up to and including costing one person her job. Justified in that he only did it to bad people who deserved it. The problem was, it was people he determined to be deserving. Edit. Since so many people asked, unless he was a big hairy gay dude also into big hairy gay dudes, you probably knew a different manipulative jerk. And he got the girl fired by antagonizing her in person repeatedly and claimed it was based on something a mutual acquaintance at work said. He then goaded her into losing her temper via text with both him and the acquaintance, which he brought straight to ours. He cried crocodile tears and said he didn't know why she was being so cruel to her co-workers. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a big deal now. but it has definitely made us reconsider our ways. I'm somewhat sloppy/slob-y. Typical bachelor things: leave socks in the living room, dishes pile up for 2 to 3 days. My wife never made a big deal out of it. I thought it was awesome that she didn't nag like my mom used to. Turns out it's because she's even more messy than me. So we ended up living in a pigsty. The happy ending is that once we decided to grow up and make a chores list, we also tend to gain momentum once we start. It's just the getting started that's an issue we are working on. Edit. I'm glad I'm not the only one. What's been helping is an app we use or home, but I'm sure there are others. There's a pre-made list of chores. We just went down and picked a few we know we are bad at and set them on a timer, 2 to 3 times a week for example. Then add a couple more chores a few weeks later. It helps because oftentimes we'll just be sitting on the couch on Reddit or Netflix while chores sit undone. With an app we get a notification and take a Reddit break to get something done. I wasn't the type that she normally went for. She preferred tall, white lanky guys with blonde curly hair. I'm short-ish, mixed blood brown, more stocky than lanky, and have dark wavy hair. She continued to fawn over these preferred guys, even when we were together for years. Also, we had hobbies that didn't really overlap. I supported her in her things, but she seemed indifferent to my things. Turns out that she never really wanted me for me. I was an inconvenient escape from her family life. When I gave her that escape in the form of moving with her 200 miles away from them, she no longer needed me. She no longer needed what I represented, because her family wasn't there to give her hell every day anymore. She pulled away slowly more and more, while I was left trying to figure out what was wrong. By this point we were together for 7 years, and in the middle of planning a wedding, she started cheating on me with, who else but a guy as fits her preferences exactly. Also this guy was 8 years older, unemployed, no degree, no job training, and married. She knew that he was married. He knew that she was engaged. They knowingly were cheating together. She only fessed up after I caught them together. 7 years of my life stolen. I have so many that I'm only starting to see now that my relationship has ended. When my ex and I were together only 6 or so months, we were talking on the phone while I was driving home from work. I couldn't even tell you what we were talking about, but it somehow devolved into him screaming at me that I'm an entitled millennial and I don't know how to take care of myself because my parents give me everything. Meanwhile, I was living on my own and my parents hadn't contributed to anything. Another big one was that he always had an issue with the amount of people I had slept with. I had more partners than he did, and he never let me forget it. He would always say things like, "You were such a slut in college, and you'll sleep with anyone." When I didn't want to do something in bed, he would say, "Well, you did it with everyone else." And when I disclosed that I was sexually assaulted in college, he said, "Well, what did you expect to happen when you went to his apartment?" And the last one that I'll write about here, I could go on for days, was that he always insinuated or outright said that I was a gold digger. I'm a nurse, and I met him while he was in his emergency medicine residency. Our salaries were the same until he graduated in June and started making doctor money. But he would always say that I was with him for money and that everyone knew I was a gold digger and that all our coworkers felt that way. Thinking about all of these things now, I don't know how I excused so much. I loved him very, very much and I thought this was somehow normal. His drinking. When we first got together I was 19. He was 23 and would drink at least a pint of whiskey every night. I was still in my party phase and figured he just had a high tolerance. As our relationship progressed he drank more and more and more and would have breakdowns that I would have to help him through. Several times he would black out and say or do horrible things, feeling me up in public when I told him not to, threatening to shoot me, telling me he was glad I was upset when I would cry while trying to help, that he wouldn't remember the next morning. When I told him what he had done he would just feel sorry for himself, so I would still have to comfort him instead of being comforted. I stopped bringing him out with my friends because I was so embarrassed by his behavior, which led to me spending my early 20s totally isolated. It took almost 2.5 years for him to finally stop drinking once I finally had enough courage to say I would leave if he wouldn't at least try to change his habits. I ended up ending the relationship not long after because I realized he only liked what I could do for him instead of who I really was. When we started dating, my ex-wife sometimes talked about a roommate from college named Carol who she'd call and ask for advice from time to time. I never heard her talk to Carol, but she would mention that they had talked. Day of our wedding, no Carol, not even a present or a card. I didn't think too much about it, just thought it was kind of sad my new wife had a friend who didn't seem considerate enough to remember our wedding. First year of our marriage, we had a big fight. She says she's going to stay with her parents for the night. I drive over there 2 hours later. No wife. My mother-in-law mentions that my wife had called and said that she was going to go stay with Carol. I ask my mother-in-law where Carol lives. She surprises me and says about a mile from here. She gives me the address and I drive straight over. Granted, I have never even seen a picture of this Carol, much less know she lived in our town. Why has this person never even visited? Why did my wife not have even one picture of her friend? I find the address and pull up to the house. My wife's car is parked in the driveway. No lights are on in the house. I walk to the front door and knock. Nothing. I knock again. Still nothing. I practically bang on the door. Nothing. At this point, I'm about to lose my mind. I walk around to the back of the house. I see one light on in a basement window, and I can hear loud music coming from inside. I kneel down and look in. From my vantage point, I can see clearly inside the basement. I see what looks like two people in the room. First, I see my wife. Then, I see a figure that my wife is apparently hugging. But then she moves her arms and suddenly I realize that my wife isn't hugging, but rather taking this person's blouse off. But when she removes the blouse, I can clearly see that it's not a woman. It's not even a man. It's a mannequin. I hit the window out of shock. My wife jumps back, scared to death. She looks up and can see that it's me, but she just waves and quickly leaves the room. I stare at this mannequin, wig, skirt, everything. I'm literally scared of my wife at this point. She comes outside, asked how I found where Carol lives. I just stare at her. She asks if I want to come inside and meet Carol. I do not know what to do. She says, "Come in, you two will hit it off in no time." I follow her through the front door. She leads me into the kitchen. She apologizes about the fight and then asks if I wanted anything to drink. I say no. She then says, "Carol should be out in just a minute." I stare at her, not sure I heard her correctly. Just then, a door to a bathroom opens. A woman walks out. She holds out her hand and says, "I'm Carol." Apparently, she's a seamstress, hence the mannequin. My wife was helping her design a blouse, something I never knew she had a talent for. We broke up a year later over something else unrelated. Carol turned out to be pretty nice, though. We went out for drinks shortly after my wife divorced me, and we've been married 9 years. And she still had that mannequin. The point is, I think she was hiding her friend from me while we were dating, and even during our short marriage. I think it was because Carol had big jugs. Every time I expressed a boundary, he made it his life's mission to completely steamroll it. He was so good at concealing what he was doing too. He was just earnestly trying to push me out of my comfort zone, to keep me from stagnating. He wanted me to surprise myself with my strength. And he was certain that any sexual boundaries were actually the result of childhood abuse, and that pushing past them would benefit me. It was all about my healing, you see. There was always some very compelling reason why he could not be expected to tolerate me saying no to him, or refusing something. It got so that I walked around with this awful sick feeling in my stomach, a kind of swallowed indignity and outrage, all the time. I found myself behaving as if I were completely indifferent to things that really meant something to me, just so I wouldn't attract his attention to it. If something really bothered me, I had to pretend I didn't notice it at all, or that it was no big deal, just to have a chance that he might stop. If there was a sexual act I disliked, I pretended that it was just mildly boring, but that I'd give it a try. If he wanted to, with that, he'd immediately lose interest. But it didn't start that way at all. It started so small. He just wanted me to talk on the phone with him more than I wanted to. I have auditory processing issues that make phone calls a challenge to follow. At times, he pleaded with me. He called me over and over. I found it annoying, but wrote it off to distance and loneliness. It was a huge goddamn red flag. When we were still dating, I discovered my then girlfriend was prone to horrific night terrors. Other times I would wake up at the sound of sharp persistent knocking loud enough to hear at the other end of the house, only to discover it was her, in her sleep, curled up in a fetal position, and hammering her knuckles into her own forehead as hard as possible. Throughout the early years of our marriage it was becoming increasingly obvious that she frequently misremembered obvious, and often innocuous, details of our shared life together, or just had complete blank spots in her memory altogether. After several years, the death of an elderly family member triggered a full mental break, and it was eventually revealed that my wife suffers a profound dissociative disorder, harboring 5 distinct identities, a condition that started developing around the age of 5, corresponding with the start of over 2 decades of the most heinous sexual and violent physical abuse she suffered at the hands of 2 family members. This has completely redefined every aspect of my life as both a husband and caregiver to my wife, with the singular act of coping as a couple, and as a family often an entirely all-consuming endeavor. I didn't notice at first that he never left my side when we were in social situations. Like literally he would follow me everywhere I went. At a party I went into a friend's room to talk with her and a couple other girls about issues she was having with her partner, and he must have looked all over for me, found me and then sat with us silently in the room when we were clearly having a serious private talk. And it wasn't like he didn't know anyone at the party. Everyone there was part of our social circle. He was just insanely clingy, which for some people I guess wouldn't be a red flag. But I need someone fairly independent who can hold their own in social situations. We were very young, so I didn't think much of it until a few months before we broke up. He would get sulky and jealous when I told him I needed to spend some time with my friends without him. After we broke up I started dating the guy who would one day be my husband, and he did the exact opposite at the first party we went to. Even though it was mostly my friends, he was outside with a group chatting and getting to know them. Looking back, it's the tie between her extreme clinginess and her parents' abusive tendencies and hoarding. After we had been dating for about a couple of months, she basically wouldn't give me even a moment to myself. If I didn't respond to her texts, or have a really good reason why I didn't respond, I'd be accused of cheating, wanting to leave her, etc. Things became horrifically worse as the relationship continued. Her parents were 2 of the worst people I've ever met. Her father ran an illegal law practice from his basement that was literally rotting away after he'd been disbarred for, I believe, 6 or 7 Supreme Court violations. I'm legally blind and have cerebral palsy, so he'd basically tell my then girlfriend that I'd never amount to anything whatsoever. I'm now a psychology professor, part-time for now, but still, and working towards my clinical behavior analysis and teaching licenses. Her mother was a pediatrician and once told me, after I thought I'd broken my foot, "It's only entertaining for me if someone is screaming in pain. Unless you start screaming, don't waste my time." As for the hoarding, their back deck collapsed under the weight of their accumulated trash. The front door couldn't be opened, so you had to enter/exit the house through a window. The kitchen was buried under a mountain of boxes, brooms, and rotten food, and 95% of the bathroom was used as a garden. When I first started dating my now ex-wife, I learned quickly that her family had always scraped by financially. I didn't think anything of this and never looked down on them. A few months after her and I moved in together, I started to notice that our budget was falling dangerously close to being short, and our grocery situation was too. I figured it was easily fixed by adjusting our budget a bit, but that didn't seem to help. Later on, she admitted to not only giving her family food but also money. Now, keep in mind that I didn't think this was a huge deal. I've always been big on the golden rule, and I sure as hell would appreciate it if someone were to help me out in times of need. Fast forward a bit. We are expecting our first child and have moved into a house. Her family was on the verge of being homeless, so my ex and I talk, and of course I agree that they can move in. By this time her mom stopped working and was content collecting disability checks. Her brother was working part-time at best. We helped her dad land a decent job where he quickly worked his way up to a supervisory position. Fast forward more. Days before our first child was born, I get laid off. Her parents talk a good game. It's gonna be a family effort and we'll make it work. We will combine our resources, and between 2.5 jobs, ex and her dad full-time, her brother part-time, and food benefits, we'll be okay. Plus her mom can take care of daycare, so we are set. I don't have to panic about finding a new job immediately. This arrangement worked great the first year. It took me 6 months to find full-time work, and I was extremely thankful that the 6 of us had come together to make it happen. By year 2 the cracks began to show. The food and money they were providing started going more and more towards what I think are essentials. Please don't buy soda, cakes, sweets, and junk food with food benefits that are desperately needed to be put towards more sensible options. She talked to them. Things would be okay for a month or so, then things would revert back. There was a huge falling out because of this, resulting in her family moving out. The years afterward were the most productive of our time together. She was doing well in nursing school, was working at a great job, and our family was on the up and up. Her family was doing okay too. Her dad and brother were working, and they had an apartment. Fast forward, again. Her brother got into some argument at work and got fired. Not long after that, her dad did the same thing. Once again her family was on the verge of being homeless. Her dad followed her mom's lead and got on disability. Once the reality of being evicted from their apartment was drawing near, we have the talk again. Her family can move in. Lessons have been learned. I should have known better. They move in with us again, and the arrangement worked fine for the first year again. By now, our second child had been born, so you're looking at 6 mouths to feed. I count the kids as one combined. If her family would have utilized their resources responsibly, it could have very well worked out. Instead the wastefulness continued. And can you imagine it got worse? What little cash benefits they received was spent on random toys for them. They also like to eat fast food. I approached my ex about this and how it seems like a horrible way to go about things. Her excuse for them was along the lines of doing those things helps them feel like regular people. I lost my shit. The next years cost me my marriage. More and more I would come home and sit in my car for a few minutes. I dreaded walking inside my own house. The place would be a mess. The sink would be full of dirty dishes. I'd come home and spend a demoralizing hour cleaning up, just so I could look through the pantry and fridge to see what I could possibly make for dinner. You see, halfway through each month the food would be gone. My ex and I would buy groceries only for them to be gone within days. It got to a point where I told the kids to keep their lunch snacks in their rooms so they didn't get eaten. That shit breaks my heart to this day. And when I would try and talk to my ex about how our living situation wasn't sustainable, she would always guilt trip me. Would I kick my parents out on the street if it were them? By the time her family moved out for the second time, my marriage was broken. In those 11 years, her family lived with us for at least 7. The second tour of duty with them put me in a serious state of depression. I was suicidal by the time they moved out. The constant tug between empathy and reason tore me up. Come to find out, I'm bipolar. This was discovered when I started to seek counseling after I was sawing at my arm in the kitchen one night. I wasn't trying to end my life, I was numb and wanted to feel something, anything. Another story for another time. Long story short, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I didn't see this at first, but when I did, I didn't think it was that bad. Now we are engaged and have a place together. Anyway, he sometimes gets mad at things, which is human, but he blames me every time for having an attitude when I explain something about what I meant by a comment that he took another way. I'll explain calmly what I meant by it, and before I'm even finished talking, he will jump right in and argue with me that's not what I meant. I'll say that's not how you took it, but yes, it is what I meant. It just goes on and on, even when I just ignore him. It'll be silent for a little bit, then he will bring it up again, trying to get me to admit I was wrong when I wasn't. And when we argue back and forth some more, he will say, "Why do you have an attitude?" and give me this questioning face, like I did something wrong when I didn't. Then he will be like, "I don't understand why you always have an attitude about everything." It annoys me so much, but I still love him. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. I would be so grateful if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel. New videos every day.